my name is Bettina Zumdig. Welcome to my kitchen. And I'm going to show you today to make a sauté with kale, with yellow onion, and also celery. One of my favorite sautés. Now, I have here winter kale, a curly kale. There are many varieties of kale. These varieties of kale usually are better served in the fall after the first frost because kale becomes sweeter then. Then I also have yellow onion here that I'm going to cut finely, as well as a piece of celery. These are the ingredients aside from oil. Best is a natural, cold-pressed, organic olive oil or another kind of oil of your choice. Natural is best, but then also sea salt or a different kind of natural salt like Himalaya salt is also a possibility. So I'll start with the kale, taking off the leaves of the kale from the center vein. Now kale, as you can see, grows out in all directions upward, so has a very more loosening effect in terms of more relaxing, so that we don't feel too tight, too heavy, too condensed. And kale is also very, very high in anti-cancerous factors, antiviral, boosting the immune system. It has many factors to help detoxify our bodies. And of course, kale is a little bit fibrous, but when cooked well, it is soft enough to eat. But the fiber in the kale allows us to propel waste out of our digestive system, and that is very important to clean our septic system, to lower our cholesterol, but also taking many other toxins out of the system. And kale is containing, as I said, many antioxidants. One of the ones that people are more familiar with is sulforaphane. That is very good for anti-diabetes. It is very good for antiviral, anti-cancer, as well as flavonoids, which are anti-allergenic, anti-inflammatory, anti-aging. So many, many factors that help in the kale to keep our bodies very, very healthy. It also helps to repair damaged DNA and repair nerves. So in that sense, very good. But aside from the fiber and all of these nutrients, you are all familiar with vitamin C. Yes, that is an antioxidant I think everybody is familiar with. And vitamin C, of course, is incredibly important for boosting our immune system. And 1 cup of kale, if it's cooked less than 3 minutes, it contains enough of your daily vitamin C doses. So 1 cup of kale and you're good for the day. Now the center vein of the kale is a little bit denser, harder. So that center vein I will cut separately, because if I just pull it apart, then it's too big pieces and too hard. So here is our center veins that I'm going to cut into thin diagonal slices. This is of course where most of the calcium of the plant is, because the center vein is hard, just like our bones. It is like the spine of the plant, and so it helps our spine, our bones, our hair, nails and teeth as well to retain strength and vitality. And I just love also the strength of kale. In Germany, I always, everybody was growing kale out in the yard. It was a traditional vegetable that would grow just about in everybody's yard and vegetable garden. And it was always eaten in the fall and provided people with enough strength to get through the winter. So this is our kale. Then we will go next and cut the celery. Now, many people are familiar with removing the strings from the celery. It is only necessary to do so if you're afraid of getting too much sodium in your diet. And of course, then I would recommend in general reducing your sodium intake in terms of salt. But if you're not afraid of your sodium intake, you don't have to remove the strings. And in fact, what I'm going to do is cut it in half lengthwise and cut it into thin diagonal slices. Now, many times when I'm cutting in diagonal slices because when I'm cutting in diagonal slices, this is cutting more in line with the natural growth of the vegetable. Everything in nature grows in a spiralic way, up and down into the ground. And cutting on this diagonal slant helps to cut with this growth pattern. So it's a more harmonious way of cutting. Celery, very upgrowing, very strengthening, full of vitamin C as well, minerals as well. Very, very good. Then we will finally go to our yellow onion and taking, of course, peeling your onion first, then taking the ends off and cutting it into thin half rounds by always having your fingers curled under of the non-knife hand. Oops. Some of the vegetables are going away from us. And now that So this is the core of the kale, the core vein, and we're going to cut it finely. It takes longer to cook, so we need to cut it finely. I'm cutting it on a thin diagonal slice. And removing the very end. Celery, into thin diagonal slices. Always keep your fingers curled under when you're cutting. that all of our vegetables are cut, we can begin the process of the saute. I have my skillet ready over here, and I will take some oil and place about 1 to 1.5 tablespoons of oil for 4 cups of kale and maybe 1 cup of onion into the saucepan. Okay, now here we are at the stove. I'm turning the flame on a medium-high flame, and we have our vegetables all cut. We'll begin with the onions, sauteing the onions first and heating our oil for just a moment. When our oil is heated, then we'll add the onions as well as a good pinch of salt. And you can test whether the oil is hot enough by placing a piece of onion in there, and when it begins to sizzle, your oil is hot enough, but we're not quite there yet. So just a moment longer. Meanwhile we're waiting, I can tell you a little bit about onions. Now onions grow in layers. As onions grow in layers, what in the body grows in layers? The skin. Perhaps other areas like the muscle also grows in layers. So onions, from an energetic perspective, are very good for the muscles, are very good for the skin function, but also from a Western perspective. It is well known that the sulfuric components in onions are very good for the skin. Now that our oil is hot enough, I'm adding the onions into the saucepan or saute pan, and I'm beginning to actively move them. Saute, did you know that saute means skip and jump in French? So that's what we're making the vegetables do. Skip and jump. When we're making the vegetables skip and jump, that means of course it has somewhat more of the activating effect. So it's good for when you wish to do things out in the world. Not so good if you wish to just study, but very good if you need to do your shopping outside, if you need to meet people, etc. Very, very good cooking method for that kind of a dynamic. Now that the onions are sauteing a bit, I'm taking a good pinch of salt to allow the onions more quickly to remove the excessive water from the onions. Once the onions have become a little translucent, and of course what happens when the onions cook for a little while and become more translucent, they also lose their strong pungent flavor, but they become a little bit more sweet in nature, more sweet flavored. So that becomes very delicious in and of itself. Many people like caramelized onions. You can saute them long enough until they become a little brown and caramelized, and you can eat onions all by themselves, nothing else needed. And also because the structure of onions is round, energetically speaking, any round places in the body benefit from that, but also like the round organs, especially the stomach, will be very much helped by onions. And in most cases is very helpful for stomach issues such as acid reflux or feeling nauseous or burping, things like that. However, if you have trouble with the onions, then you may wish to simply leave onions out or use a different vegetable. And here's our sauteed onions becoming very soft. So now I'm going to add the celery as well as the stems from the kale, and sauteing these ingredients a moment longer. celery is very wonderful in terms of harmonizing our hormones in the body, but also helping liver function. So now we're sauteing these ingredients together. So celery, good for hormone function, liver function, gallbladder function, high in fiber, helping intestines propel out waste more easily. Okay, now that our sauteed vegetables are soft enough, at the very last moment, this is when I'm going to add the kale. The kale, as I said, I wish to cook less than 3 minutes because of the vitamin C content. Vitamin C content is heat sensitive, and if I cook it too long, then it will deteriorate. So, adding my kale into the pot. I can either add a little bit of water into the mixture and heat it all the way through, or I can keep stirring or pseudo steam them. I'm going to, for a moment, put the lid on, just generate a little bit of steam and soften them a bit, and then going to mix them up a little bit more. Ooh, the smell is delicious, and it's just about done. And I forgot to mention earlier, but the reason I'm adding the onions, the celery, and the stems from the kale in at the beginning is because they need to cook a little bit longer to soften a little bit more. Now we're going to put our ingredients into a dish. And I like to use wooden utensils in my metal pots because it tastes better. Usually when you use metal on metal, there is an electron discharge that sometimes makes the food taste a little bit more like metal. So wooden utensils, of course, chopsticks is by all means not a necessity. But here is our finished dish, and I'm going to put some on a plate right here. Of course, some people may think this doesn't have enough flavor. And the kale, in this case, is still a little bit chewy. So you can cook it longer if you also are not worried about your vitamin C intake. Perhaps you're eating plenty of fruits, so you don't need your vitamin C coming from your kale. So cooking the kale longer will make it softer, and then putting, maybe for added seasoning, some soy sauce, good quality soy sauce on it, or some more spicy sauces like the ginger sauce, a mustard sauce, perhaps Worcester sauce, maybe some cayenne pepper. Anything like that is possible to make it more interesting and delicious. I hope you will enjoy. This is very nutritious, very delicious, and I hope you will visit my kitchen again sometime. Es schmeckt delicious. Es schmeckt wunderbar. This is the German version of it tastes just fabulous. Thank you.